Welcome to another Cliff List webinar, and today I've got the pleasure and honor of visiting with my old friend Carlos Xuma, who has been around the dating scene for quite some time. Carlos was an honored cherished speaker at my last Cliff List convention, and Carlos is sort of been around a long time, knows a lot of people, a lot of stuff. But for those who don't know him, Carlos, why don't you give everybody a little bit of an introduction to what you do and your history and that sort of thing?
Sure. Make me sound kind of old there, man. No, it has been a while. The dating advice niche for guys has been around for quite a while, and that's a testament to do to help guys. What I do specifically to help guys, and it's always been my particular unique edge of this, the science of attraction. Guys how to tap into their masculinity in order to attract women. In other words, how to kind of reconnect to some of the things a lot of guys have lost in the last 20, 30, probably even longer years of these waves of feminism that we seem to keep going through, usually end up leaving guys out in the cold. So guys don't have the resources they need to be as effective and to be attractive to women. So I show them how to connect with that, how to use that sincere quality place in a guy's life to really get interested in, whether it's getting her into bed or getting her for a relationship, which eventually is, I think, every guy's goal, whatever it is you want after that.
And that basically tell us a little bit about your own history, about how you started in this, and what how your own experiences with women, how they evolved, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, my experience is probably pretty typical of most guys. I I had extreme unsuccess for quite a while trying to get out there. I remember I relocated to the San Francisco Bay Area. I've since moved away from there, but back in the day when I was there for about 20 years, when I relocated to the Bay Area, I was having a difficult time just finding new people to hang out with. And then it became, okay, I got to start dating. And then I realized I really didn't have a good set of skills, you've seen guys like salesmen and people go in and they can network in a room. They know how to socialize. I was an introvert. I didn't have any of the groovy mojo of those guys to be able to, hang in there with a conversation with really anybody, not just women. But it really showed up, obviously, with women. I wasn't getting any success. I wasn't getting dates. And then I think I reached a crisis point in my articles where I was on a double date with a friend of mine who set me up with somebody. And at the end of the date, I just wanted to go in for a hug and just say, hey, it was great hanging out with you guys. And I went for the hug and the girl cringed. And that was like, oh, man, that sucks. First of all, she did it, which was just a total bitch thing to do. But that I couldn't even elicit a response of attraction that was just to get a hug. That just killed me. So I made a resolution right then and there. I had to figure this thing out, as we often say, and figure out what it is that makes women attracted to guys.
So what sort of brought you on the road to your solving that?
Interestingly enough, it was a book by a friend of mine, or he became a friend of mine afterwards. And it's funny that I actually became connected with the author. It's a book back from the early 90s called How to Be the Jerk Women Love. It's by F.J. Shark. It was probably the first of its kind that kind of told it like it is when it comes to being attracted to women. I think it was the first book I'd seen. I mean, yeah, Ross Jeffries had his stuff out for a while, but this was a book that was fairly accessible, and I found it in an actual bookstore. And it talked about things like negging and not doing what it is women usually expect of you in order to stand out in her mind. And what the thought process is of the so-called jerk, who's really nothing more than a really confident guy. He's got that dominant attitude, or what I call the alpha man. And it's turned it around for me a little bit. I'm like, wow. And I, eventually got to know him a little better, and even had him as an interviewee on one of my interviews as well.
So how did you integrate that into your own behavior? How did it, just reading something doesn't necessarily give you the ability to act out what you've read?
Yeah, exactly. That's an excellent point. Reading books is great. And a lot of guys get hooked on the collection of content. I know guys that have massive collections of all the stuff out there. They've bought all my stuff. They've bought all, everybody's stuff out there. And that really, you're right. That's not the differentiator. The obvious differentiator. There's a saying that knowledge is power. It's really not. Knowledge is not power. It's potential power. It's when it's put into action that it becomes power. So what I did was start taking some of the application of that, or some of the things I was reading, some of the things I was learning about, other books I was reading on human behavior and rational behavior, because we all want to believe on the surface that we're all very rational creatures, but most people are driven by primal desires, emotional part of their brain. They don't even realize it, and especially women. So what I did was just broke that down, started coming up with my own things to say in certain situations. I remember when I first came up with my first quote unquote routine to use on a girl, it was something I was going to leave. It was a message I was going to leave on her answering machine. And that actually worked out. And I was like, wow, this stuff actually kind of works. So putting it to use was the critical difference in obviously being successful versus not. If I know it, that's one thing. If I say it, that's another. And if you do it with a congruent attitude where you believe it and it becomes part of your identity, that's the kind of the final step of that.
One of the things that I sort of feel is that, it's one thing to come up with a game plan, but if your game plan isn't successful, you can start being even more hesitant than you were in the beginning. For example, if you start approaching women and you just never have any success at it, you start to link approaching with failure, and I think that's probably even worse than where you started from, because before you started, you didn't know if you were going to fail or not.
Yeah.
I guess was there anything in particular that you think made your efforts successful over just simply making an effort?
Well, one of the important things is they call it the baby steps. You got to start out with small things you can do. A lot of guys go into this and they realize, wow, this is it. This is the stuff that will probably work. Just some part of your mind clicks and tells you, yeah, this makes sense, even if it doesn't quite make sense. There's a part of you that understands that, but there's also a part of us that we want to know it all before we go out there so we don't make any mistakes. And that's a real dangerous trap to fall into as well. The big thing, and this is what I taught every guy that I did boot camps with, or all my materials, or any of the coaching that I used to do, the one-on-one coaching, was that you had to do whatever you could do right now, a small manageable chunk, and get good enough at it. Because every guy wants to be, he wants to run out there and be the instant Michael Jordan or the instant super success at something, and it's just not realistic. You have to kind of bring it down to where you are as a person and build from there. That's the critical thing there. Because if you reach too far too fast, you're going to blow yourself out, because you'll fail, and then you won't know why you failed, and then it becomes this downward spiral of just despair, really, in getting your game back on.
From your experience in coaching guys, what sort of key things would you say you were able to advise them in terms of shifting from perhaps having less failure to having more failure, that actually you found that it really worked perhaps better than other things that might have been suggested?
Well, one is really important, is not to just be parroting the words. You got to come from a congruent place in yourself. One of the things I came up with was this thing I call real game. And it's an acronym, REAL. The and resourceful. You got to be relaxed and feeling like yourself in order to be able to communicate effectively. But again, many guys would memorize a line and then they'd be so worried that they memorized it right, or they'd say it right, that they kind of make this shift outside of themselves. And you see this when you see somebody that's a public speaker that isn't quite sure about what they're talking about, or when you're not really attached to what it is you're saying. Being resourceful, meaning having the stuff you need to say. Effective and energized is the E, which means it has to be something that works, and you have to do it with a certain amount of energy that feels like it's you, it's real, and it's excited, not just, hey, how are you doing today? A lot of guys come across very with their approach. The A is alpha and authentic, which means it has to come from a masculine place, and it also has to feel like it's really you. And then lifestyle and lasting is the L. So it has to be part of your lifestyle. You don't just do this. You don't just go out on Saturday night to attract women. You're always looking for the opportunity to meet people, not even just women, just talk to people, to reach out a little bit more, slightly expand your comfort bubble to incorporate more people. That's what makes it lasting. That's what makes it a pervasive habit that will be your kind of your keystone to success going forward.
Can you like give us an example of a specific, I guess, individual situation where you had a guy that had certain, call it, areas where he was having difficulty, and you sort of guided him with your advice to change that?
Yeah. One of the guys, I remember this guy distinctly. He was a real sweet guy. I mean, almost all the guys that ever showed up in all my boot camps were all really cool guys. They didn't even really want to be pickup artists. They just wanted to have this skill so they didn't feel like they were missing out on a really big part of their life, which is to have, a woman in their life. And this guy one of his problems was he would break into this uncontrollable sweat. He was just a sweater. He just broke it out into sweat on his face, his back. I mean, I remember being in the bar with him, and he's pulling his shirt, trying to fan himself, and you can see it dripping off his brow. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so bad. Poor guy. And then I kind of realized, okay, he's in a mental state that is, it's making him nervous. It's making him uncomfortable, which is obviously being reflected in his physical aspect. So just kind of stopped him. I coached him a little bit with how to stay a little bit more calm, how to go into it with a little less trying to be this other guy that's attractive to women and trying to be a little bit more like himself, because that's the source of most guys' failures, is that they suddenly try to be this other guy and they come across as insincere. And believe me, women can sense that. So I gave him a little bit of a mantra, something to repeat to himself, got him to first clean himself up, get rid of the sweat. And he was still a little sweaty going in. But what I did was I just gave him a quick little line. I said, look, if you do start to get a little bit nervous in that, point it out, make it like, talk about the elephant that's in the room. This is one thing that guys are also trying to avoid is, avoiding the fact that they're nervous. They don't want to appear nervous. I would make it a little thing to joke about, like, oh my God, you'd think it was like 100 degrees in here. Why am I sweating like this? This is ridiculous. Oh, it must be your beauty or something like that. I gave him a line, something along the lines of that to use if he did get into trouble. And sure enough, it was more endearing because it was more real. It was exactly what was happening in the moment, and she appreciated it. And it kind of breaks down barriers between people when you're vulnerable like that.
All right. You mentioned earlier that you're sort of focused on helping guys connect with their masculinity, basically. And I've sort of seen a big trend towards things like a modern gentleman out there, that this is like where things are headed. And maybe you can give us a little bit of a introduction to how you see masculinity and how you propose it for guys who maybe need to be freshened up or educated in it.
Yeah, it's a tricky space to navigate these days. I mean, the political climate is such that everything has become all about the woman. Everything is about her and her situation. And not to refute that in any way, I'm not like some misogynist dinosaur, but the reality is that we're swinging the pendulum far too far over to the other end of the spectrum. And if you ask a lot of women, you're going to find out that they also kind of realize this. The only women you're hearing about in the media and such are the ones that are the most vocal. I did an interesting bit of research recently. And if I were to ask, well, let me ask you, Cliff, what do you think the percentage of women are concerned about women's equality today? What percentage of the women do you think that is? Just off the top of your head, based on
probably 50-50.
Okay. The reality is it's like 5%. About 5% of women actually have that as a concern in their life. And if you look at these, I actually have a study that was done. It was breaking them out by age group. I mean, all the way from like 19 to 60 and 70. And consistently through every single age group, I think the highest it got was 6%, somewhere around age 20, and then just kind of decreased. And it wasn't even an issue after, I think, like 40 or 50 or something like that, which kind of flies in the face of what you would think is reality based on what you see in the media. And that kind of thing is what guys have to be ready to deal with, because the reality is, for a man to be successful with women, he's got to be able to hold his own space. He's got to be confident enough in what he knows about women and what he knows about the dynamics of how men and women interact to be able to hold that space confidently, because that's kind of the essence of masculinity. And it was a reason that my wife and I got together originally, was she sensed that in me, that I'm not going to let a woman just steamroll me in a conversation, or I'm not going, if she says something, I'm going to call BS on it. If it's BS, I'm not going to let her get away with it. And those are the qualities that women are actually hungry for. The other 95% of the women who aren't really caring that much about the whole equality issue, they really want to get back to this kind of essential, well, you said it very well, the kind of new gentlemanly thing, which is to know, he's chivalrous, he's quote unquote confident. That actually is a whole other subject, rabbit hole we could go down. He knows certain things about women and understands them enough to be able to act based on those beliefs. The woman is giving him grief, or maybe even a little resistant initially. And that's a tricky thing to do for a lot of guys, because again, we see this stuff in the media and we believe, oh, women are really concerned about being equal and getting paid the same. And that's a whole political thing I'm not going to get into, but you really got to understand as a man what is going on out there. So masculinity for me, I call it alpha masculinity. I don't call it being an alpha male, because that's a scientific term for animal behavior. For humans, it's different. Alpha masculinity means understanding the social interactions between men and women, understanding what women are really looking for in masculine behavior. They're not looking for guys that are hipster and have these ridiculous beards. That's kind of a fake, superficial edge of masculinity in a lot of ways. Looking like a lumberjack is not going to get you laid. You got to really focus on the things that are distinguished. If you want to use some great examples, Sean Connery from every James Bond movie, for the most part. Yeah, sometimes he went a little bit further than we can go today. Cary Grant, a lot of the classic actors out of the 40s and 50s, watch them hold their space with women on film. It's the most educational thing you can do. And if you can come from the space that these guys come from, today, you're going to have an immense amount of success. You don't have to become some male feminist to get anywhere. I see a lot of guys trying that path and realizing that that's a losing cause too.
Let me ask you about, I think, the kind of undisputed champion of what brings success to men with women, and that is confidence. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that, and how do you basically help guys become more confident? What advice can you give to guys about that?
Well, the biggest thing I can tell a guy, and that's the one thing I tell up front in all my materials, is not a feeling. There's a great book by M. Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled. I don't know if you've read it. It's an excellent book about the social functioning of people and how it gets kind of messed up. And it's an excellent book, and it's been popular for so many years for the same reason. And he talks about it in terms of love. Not a feeling you have. It's a verb. It's an action you take. And it's the same thing with confidence. A lot of people assume that to be confident means you have this feeling of I can do anything at any time, and you just have this warm, fuzzy feeling inside you. And that's not true at all. Confidence is simply the ability and the desire to do what you need to do, even if you're afraid, even if you're feeling like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. If you're a little insecure inside, that's okay. You're still confident if you can still go through with it. So the question is, if the guy who's in the bar say anything to the woman, but feels great inside, is he confident? I don't know. But the guy who actually walks over and talks to the woman, even though he's feeling shaky, insecure, and his knees are knocking, that guy is confident because he did the confident thing. Does that matter? Does that make sense?
Well, I think the guy with the knees knocking wants to figure out, how can I do this without the knees knocking?
Yep, he probably does. And that's the key to that that's an excellent point, is to keep doing it, because it becomes natural. It becomes much easier. You're always going to have a certain amount of trepidation, because that's built into men. This is a low-level programming. It's genetic, believe it or not, in men, is that we are simply a little shaky and a little bit put out of our element by talking to women. And it comes from the whole, if you want to look at the evolutionary thing, that it used to be we were in small tribes and you didn't want to get rejected because then other women would see that, and you don't have that many women to go through in a small tribe. So guys are very sensitive to a woman's opinion, very sensitive to her reaction to him. And today, more than ever, you have to realize that you have an infinite supply of women to meet. And you really just, there's no end to it, especially with the growth of metropolitan cities and things like that. You've just got a big pool to draw from. So yeah, your knees will always be a little shaky. Mine still, I still get a little bit nervous. I'm married and I still talk to women all the time because I know that's the key to being success with my wife also, is that I'm confident and I'm cool and I'm calm, but I can do that by reaching out and still putting myself out there a little bit, being the verb, if you will, of talking to people. It's still always going to be a little bit. So resign yourself to that, let it be what it's going to be, and realize that after a while, that little weird knee knocking thing actually becomes a source of energy. It becomes an excitement, like a tingling, ooh, this is going to be good. You know, kind of like I think a lot of the guys that get into the octagon and the MMA feel, they're all nervous. No matter how tough they look on the outside, they're a little shaky on the inside. You never go into those fights. Take it from me. I was a martial arts instructor. You never go into a match without a little bit of hesitation inside you. Maybe not hesitation, but a little feeling of, I got to be on. And that's what makes your game that much stronger.
Okay, so you mentioned before, I guess, about tying into a more natural approach. For example, when the guy was sweating, he would point it out and use that as a way to connect with the woman, because you're sort of tying into the moment. What other tips or suggestions do you have for guys for meeting women actually in person?
I love doing that exact same thing, but in different ways too. I'm always calling out the elephant in the room. One of my favorite ways to walk up to a woman, approach a woman, it still is actually, because it's more fun now, is if you see a guy that's approached her and she didn't really respond to him, or there wasn't like any chemistry there, or she gave it her best shot, but he didn't seem to be able to hold up his end of the deal. After he walks away, I always go over and say, so what was that? Did he totally flub it on the opener there? What happened? And then she'll kind of get it on a certain level that I get it on the same level, that I can observe these interactions and I understand what it's like from her perspective. As a woman, women are approached all the time. They're constantly dealing with guys. And again, they manage to suffer through it, but they also see this social interaction from a different perspective than most guys do. And a lot of women are actually sympathetic to it. They understand how hard it is for a guy to work up his courage to go over and talk to her. So most women will respond in some way. If they are bitchy right off the bat, that's an immediate dismissal in my book. You don't get a choice there. I don't care how beautiful a woman is. I always reserve that last point on the 9 out of 10 scale for her personality and her friendliness and her coolness, because no woman is a 10 without that. So calling out the what's going on in front of you right now is a great way of doing it. Like I'll be able to sweep in and start talking to her, because now there's that, oh, you get it. Okay, well, here's what happened. The guy came over and blah, 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 blah. You know, and I don't diss him too much as have fun with the interaction, because immediately now I'm connected to her on a different level. Some other great techniques for guys to use in conversation are, well, of course, using the present moment. Every single woman has a phone with her, so you can always use that as a reference point. One of the ways I would have guys approach women in groups was to take his phone and show off some app that did something really cool, or a really weird, really wild video on YouTube. You know, something that's a little bit out of the norm that she probably hasn't seen yet. And believe me, women have seen quite a bit when it comes to the stuff on their phones. There's just so many approaches you can do just based around the phone right now, because every single woman is carrying them, and there's all these things about a cell phone that you can talk about. Like, okay, I'm a cell phone psychic. I'm going to try and guess how much battery life you have left in your phone. 27%. You know, something like that starts a conversation, and it's fun, and that real too, because you know everybody understands and gets phones. Yeah, anything in the moment present, that you're talking, that you can talk about right then and there that's happening, as opposed to trying to draw some approach or opener that doesn't feel like you're always better off with the thing that's happening.
Okay. Is there any particular suggestions you have in terms of when guys are out in nightclubs, for example?
Well, that one right there is another great one. The ESP of I can guess where your cell phone is. Nightclubs are just, they have never been my preferred place to go to meet women. That's where you go to practice meeting women and talking to women, because it's a more difficult environment in a lot of ways. It's louder. You've got a different kind of crowd there. A lot of guys go there just simply because the women are younger. But quite frankly, I find most younger women pretty annoying after the first 5 minutes of talking to them. So it's not really interesting to me, but I would go there nonetheless, because it's an easy place to practice your game. There's so many better places though, if you really want to go to meet women, because a lot of women are going out to bars and nightclubs to peacock themselves, to get attention, to get, they want to get their ego stroked. Women have their own side of their ego that they like to have attended to, and that's that they are attractive. A woman needs to feel on a certain level that she is physically attractive to men. And a lot of women are there too to meet guys, but as an environment, I'm not, I'll say that it's just one of the places I would take guys to, but I would say, look, if you're sincerely looking for a girlfriend, this ain't the place. This is just a place you go to kind of hone your edge, kind of like a comedian doing stand-up. You've got to be willing to go out there and just try stuff. It's a great place. I call it a simulator. Basically, you're going out to do a lot of test runs on things you want to talk about, see if you can get conversations started. It really isn't that hard to get started in conversations in a nightclub. I think what's intimidating is the atmosphere, the clientele, the meat market factor, where there's a ton of other guys doing the same thing. You can go a lot easier and go to different venues than that to get the thing you're looking for.
Okay. Well, what about I guess times and places that you think are better than nightclubs, rather than Daygame, I assume, and or perhaps other suggestions such as taking courses or whatever. Where do you sort of direct guys, if not so much to the nightclubs?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Daygame. However, that's also really intimidating to guys too, because now you're talking to women that it's a different environment where they're in the nightclub and women are expecting to be talked to, whereas on the street or in stores and stuff like that, they're not as prepared for that. A lot of women are actually caught up in their own head, so you have to do a different kind of work there. There you have to break down some shielding that's up, that's just natural shielding that women have. But my favorites have always been speed dating, because it's a more sincere clientele. The women are still really attractive. I remember going to several events in San Francisco. Several of the women I dated for long term after that. So it was a great way of meeting women. Plus, it also was an excellent way to practice openers, because you're guaranteed to be talking to somebody. The person is going to respond to you and is going to engage you in conversation no matter what. Okay. And I would just practice different things to say. So I would do things like I'd sit down with a woman and say, "So what are you doing to change the world?" And she'd be like, "Whoa, what?" Because that was totally out of her norm. Almost every guy that would sit down with her would say something like, "So are you from the area? What do you do for work?" These boring small talk questions. And I knew I had to stand out. So that was one of the ones I tried that worked fantastic for talking to women. And that one actually works in a lot of other different situations too. So I highly recommend things like speed dating, a lot of singles events, any place there's a mixed crowd like that. Obviously singles events can be a mixed bag too. Sometimes you get a lot older folks in that too. So if you're looking to meet somebody a higher age range, it's always up there too. One really good way is, of course, they call it the hired guns. Going into stores and talking to the people that work there is a great way of not only practicing, but again, you're guaranteed a conversation because she has to respond to you. She's got to try and sell you something. So it's at least a start, or at least interact with you. So that's a great way of doing it. Yeah, taking courses is good too. It can be a little bit more of a commitment, because if you're in a class and you figure out, oh my God, there's not that many women here I'm attracted to, and the one that I was is married, you're going to be like stuck in this class now and not not being able to talk to other people. So you got to do things like yoga classes or do stuff where there's a high turnover. Especially classes at a gym are really good. Things like that. Was it the Zumba that they do? There's all kinds of things you can engage in on that level. And of course, all kinds of short-term classes too. So if one doesn't work out, that's fine. 3 weeks, you're out and on to the next thing. But really, you just got to look at every opportunity in your life that you have to get out of the house and get in front of people. Online dating, I used to work like a maniac, and it worked. It works great if you know how to work it. Again, it comes down to creating a good profile, knowing how to formulate your picture correctly, but you can really have a lot of success. I'm just going to say that with online dating if you know what you're doing, because you can run a lot of numbers. So those are just a few of the ways.
Well, how about a little more detail on the online dating success? If that was a good direction for you, obviously people say have a good picture, but sometimes you don't get much detail on what that means. And, it's also the same thing about the profile, because, my experience has been you just can never totally know what is going to work with which women. Some women, for example, I've seen women in front of Tinder, and there just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the ones that they pick and the ones that they refuse.
And the funny thing is, usually because you would look at the superficial elements of it, like, that guy looks like he's, that looks like a good picture, but you're not looking at the subtext of the picture. So some of the things you want to communicate with it are, you want to communicate a certain level of confidence, a certain level of sophistication to a certain level. The pictures where you're holding your shirt up and showing your abs, not a good idea. Instead, try for something a little bit more calm. A couple of factors that are important are things like not smiling. I know that's a big back and forth for a lot of people, but not smiling. A smirk is good. Something that shows a little attitude is good. You want a knowing look in your eye, a kind of an expression on your face that says you're thinking something that she wants to find out about. Okay, that kind of expression is a really good thing to have in your picture. Groups of people doing beer bongs or drinking out of a boot, not a good idea. You want to obviously communicate a certain lifestyle that she can be interested in. Clothing choice is good. You can get photographers to help you with that too. Composition is important to a certain degree. I wouldn't use selfies, because that kind of communicates the wrong social aspect to women. You want to have it being something like you were caught candid to a certain degree. Animals can be good if you're with your pet, but again, don't go out of your way to attend to any of these one things. Just be sincere. You don't have to have a lot of pictures either, but just enough to spike her curiosity. As profiles go, same thing applies for profiles that I was talking about when I was sitting down with the women in speed dating. You got to stand out and you got to be different. Women don't look at the profiles to find out whether or not they're compatible with you. They look at your profile to try and figure out, number one, if you're married, because that's what they run into most often. Number two, what kind of a person you are based on your profile. So your profile should communicate something a little more interesting. I would make mine more poetic. I wouldn't talk about what I like. It's not a place to put facts about your life. It's a place to embed emotion. This is something women never see in men's profiles, is emotional content. So think like a poet, write it like a poet, because you're a poet and you didn't know it. There's ways of embedding that. I had a profile I kept, and I still have a copy of it that I send to my clients, my online clients. And it does that. It talks in a way that speaks to her mind. Think about what a woman is thinking about as she's scrolling through those pictures, as she's scrolling through the profiles. What is she thinking about? And talk to that person instead of just trying to ramble off facts. Because again, that's lazy thinking, and that's where a lot of guys and girls actually get stuck in their profiles, is they just want to put facts down to see, well, I like this, I don't like that, I like this, I don't like that. If you find that interesting, contact me. That's not how you do it, because you're not going to find that out from a profile. You're going to find it out when you actually meet the person. So your job creating a profile is to make the most interesting profile that would make every woman go, I'd want to know more. That's it. And go from there.
Okay. Maybe tell us a little bit more about you've had a pretty diverse background, being a martial arts instructor, and I think now you're coaching women as well. So maybe give us a little bit more of information or description about type of things that you've been involved in the past.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit. I had a friend that he joked that, dude, you're kind of a Renaissance man, which I thought was kind of cool. I like that. Yeah, I've been a martial arts instructor. I've done sales. I've done life coaching. I've done information technology. That's what got me out to San Francisco originally. And of course, now I'm doing coaching for women as well. I'm also working on programs based on social and just basically lifestyle coaching in a lot of ways, how to bounce back from adversity, how to be more social. I have a program called Power Social Skills for guys that kind of talks about dating a little bit, but it's mostly about how to handle yourself with people. So kind of a wide diversity of things I've done in the past, and I'm still continuing to do other things now. I'm studying some certain healing disciplines and psychology to do more live practice with people or more live work with people. So got a lot of things to do in this life.
Well, now you're also, you mentioned that you've been married. I don't know how long you've been married, but that's obviously a very significant experience for someone in their experiences with women and their history with women. What made you decide to do that, and what's your current philosophy in terms of relationships?
Well, and I have to tell you that I don't take marriage lightly, because most of them are frankly going to fail, because human beings were never really made to mate for a life, or if they did, the life that they were mating for wasn't going to be all that long. Now we experience a lot of different things, and there's lots of biological cycles and lots of things to understand before you even think about getting married, because let's be honest, today's climate is not it's not a good place for a guy to get married and have it not succeed. So my advice for most guys would be to avoid it unless it's absolutely necessary, because there's a lot of other ways of appeasing it. Even my wife was fine with that until it got to a certain point where I'm like, you know what, we should do this. And here's why. Because I knew her personality inside and out. I knew that she was feminine. I knew that she was behind everything I did when I'm teaching this stuff to guys. So yeah, marriage is a tricky space. We didn't actually get married until just a few years ago. We've been together for about 10 years, and we've only been married for a few years. So we could easily have just not done that thing. It really is just a legal declaration. A lot of women will, again, challenge you on this. So you got to really get it straight in your head, what you think about it and what you want to do with that. A lot of guys, I think, would be fine with it, but they also have to understand the repercussions and the potential downside. That being said, there's a lot of room these days for polyamory, for non-monogamous relationships, if you know how to structure those as well, which is something I've also explored. So it's a tricky space. It's not something, we could spend probably a whole other call on just talking about that particular aspect. But I think for the most part, guys have to choose well. You've got to choose, and you've got to put a lot of thought into the woman that you're choosing to be with. Don't just date a woman because she's hot. Don't ever date a woman just because she's physically attractive. That's the surest recipe for disaster in your life. Just look at all the examples out there in society and your friends and the world, and you're going to see it everywhere. Make a decision based on her essential energy. Is she a good fit in that respect? Is she going to constantly challenge you? Is she going to constantly be giving you grief? There's so many little things you got to look at there before you even take a step in that direction. So choose well first, and then think about the other stuff later
on. In terms of, relationships, you've obviously been with this young lady now for 10 years. It's a pretty serious involvement.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has been the main factor that's made it so successful to stick together this long?
The biggest factor is that, first of all, we're both growing. We're both expanding. I'm doing a lot of spiritual practices now. And that aspect of my life has expanded incredibly, which has allowed me to see a lot more things too. I'm a much more effective coach and communicator, and just overall doing what I do than I've ever been. And she allows herself to be taught by me. I'm also her kind of coach in a lot of ways. She's very, very, very feminine. She doesn't jive with today's view of what a woman should be. That's tricky because for her it causes friction because she only has certain women that she can really get along with. But at the same time, you know, me as a person, I had to be able to recognize that this is the actual kind of woman that a guy would be attracted to because of the energy coming from her. So she has the energy to not put up with my crap if that's what it comes to. But on the other hand, I also know how to create that masculine shell around our relationship, and she trusts it and she doesn't fight me on it. And there's not a lot of this nonsense of women today that are constantly testing guys. She understands it and she gets it. Every so often she'll test me, but she also knows that I understand how the test works and I'm going to pass it. So, yeah, to ask for that one thing that makes it work, it really is. I chose well. I recognized it immediately that she had that kind of personality that would, first of all, match mine, but second of all, it's the right type for almost every guy if he knows what to look for. Quite frankly, lately I haven't seen a lot of that in American women. She's also not American. She's Filipino in background. She's born here in the U.S., so she is American, but she's of a different ethnic background. And I think that's an important factor too.
How did you actually meet her, and why did it stick in the beginning?
I was her karate teacher, actually. That's how we met, and kind of took off from there, mostly because the energy I carried to teaching martial arts is also the energy I take to the relationship, which is, you know, strength and focus and confidence, if you will. And that kind of feeling was safe to her, and it was something she was looking for at the time. And that kind of carried over into our eventual romantic relationship.
Maybe you can tell us about some of your guy students that maybe pick out one or two that you had a particularly, either they were particularly difficult and you helped them solve their issues, or some ones that you're particularly pleased about the success that they've had because of your intervention, basically.
Well, I mean, it's been a little while. I've done some coaching recently, one-on-one, direct with guys. Most often now I'm doing more work with women, so I haven't done a lot with guys. So some from the past would be the guys that really just stuck with it. You know, against all odds, they didn't quit. They didn't just give up and say, "Oh, this isn't good. It's not for me." I see that a lot in guys that write in, is this desperate need to quit as soon as possible so they can let themselves off the hook, which is a real big factor in success in life, quite honestly. It's something I call the letter to Garcia, or letter for Garcia. There's an essay out there that was written, I think, back in the 1800s called Letter to Garcia or Letter for Garcia. And it talks about this one critical success element, and it's the most important thing in the world. And it's kind of a big one, but it's something that I saw in the guys that were successful versus the ones who weren't. And it was this, the essay basically talks about a guy who hands this other guy a letter and says, "I need you to get this to Garcia." And the guy's like, and the difference in who succeeded at that task versus who didn't was, he sums it all up. He says, it was the guy that would take it from me. He wouldn't sit there and ask me a bunch of questions. He wouldn't sit there and talk about all his problems. He wouldn't like go to the library and research a bunch of stuff. He would just do it. He would do what it took to do it and wouldn't stop until he got that thing done. The person that you can give that letter to and know that it's going to get to Garcia, that guy is going to be a huge, huge success because he's going to find resources. He's going to tap into energy. He's going to change himself. He'll do what it takes to get the job done. And those were the guys that really succeeded. And it sounds like sound like it's a slight ordeal, but yeah, it's kind of an ordeal. But number one, what else are you going to do with your 80 plus years here on the planet other than get better at being you? And what else would you want to do other than improve yourself? If you're going to quit, you're never going to be success at anything, much less approaching, talking to women, seducing women, whatever it is you really want to do, having that relationship you want. So it's more of a generic thing than anything else. The guys that were successful, the particular ones that stand out were the guys who grabbed the ball and ran with it to the end zone, who took the letter and got it to Garcia, that just understood that you just have to put that energy in, and that's it. As was it Ed Harris's character in Apollo 13 said, failure is not an option.
Now that's definitely an important motto. You mentioned that now you're spending most of your time working with women, and I'm assuming a lot of that has to do with relationships and men. And I guess what insights maybe could you pass along from your experiences teaching women about what they're doing and they're looking for and how they go about it, that may help guys connect with them better?
That's a good question too. Yeah, the the inside secrets from the other side. The key difference is obviously women don't have to do the approaching, and they don't want to do the approaching. What women's primary concern is in a relationship is maintaining and keeping the connection, because for her that was always the thing. I mean, throughout history, that's the thing that made women successful, is maintaining a strong connection with a man so that he could protect her, so that he could provide for her. And she wants to be protected and she wants to be provided for, no matter what you hear in the news or on TV or in movies. That's what women want. You know, you get these false images of women who can kick a 340-pound guy's butt in a movie, but that's not real. That's not real life. That's just something to sell movie tickets. So for women, the big thing is to be feeling safe and protected and connected to the guy she's with. And she cannot feel connected to a guy if he's adopting this pickup persona or this other person that he puts on to try and be attractive. All men are inherently attractive if they tap into the right energy, this alpha energy, if you will. So from the other side, the perspective for a woman is she wants to keep and maintain that relationship. And she feels it most when she feels like a man is pulling away from her. Now that may sound familiar, because when you hear about things like negging, certain specific tactics that men do to create that attraction, they're usually around this idea of pulling away or challenging the connection in some way. And that's why it works primarily. But it's also not a valid way to create a connection. You create a connection in a totally different way. And that's what you should be focusing on first. Don't worry about these little tricks of making a hot woman feel like she's not so hot. That's not the success factor. The success is in creating a connection with her that she can believe and trust and think is real, because it should be real. That's what will work with her ultimately.
Okay, well, maybe now you could tell us a little bit about what you have available for guys who would like to learn more from you, in terms of whether you're providing, I don't know if you're doing any coaching these days or if you have products or events. Let's just give us a little background about what you have available that can help guys go to the next level.
Sure. I don't do much phone coaching. I will do it on occasion. If I'm particularly intrigued by the case, if you will, it kind of sounds like a private detective or something, but it's a lot like that now. I don't have that much time to devote to it, but you can always apply and I can always get you the information. As far as products are concerned, I highly encourage guys to go on over to my site that gets probably the most traction and a lot of traffic right now is winwithwomen.com. There's a hyphen in between, so it's win-with-women.com. /sexual sparks is the program I would recommend for most guys right off the bat, because it talks about the thing I think most guys want to know, which is how do I get that attraction energy going as soon and as fast as possible in the interaction. And it's my most recent product. It's one of the most, probably the most pertinent to most guys that are getting started or even have been doing this for a while and understanding attraction. So again, that's winwithwomen with hyphens.com /sexual sparks. And that's probably the best place I would start for most guys. And you'll see that I got a bunch of sites out there, but I'm going to keep it simple. And really at the basics, just get on my mailing list, just sign up, get the articles, get the videos I've got, and then go from there. And I'm sure you'll find something that'll help you.
Well, that's good. And I want to mention for anybody who is listening to this and does decide to buy something from Carlos, that if you email both him and me that you received, you went and did this, I will send you in addition a free Cliffs List bonus product just as a thank you for having done that.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, Carlos, I want to thank you for taking the time with me today and giving us a good rundown of, you know, how you do things, what you think, and this sort of thing. And I'm looking forward to doing this with you again soon.
Sounds good. Great talking to you, Cliff.
All right. Take care.
All right.